All right, welcome in to Check the Mic. Sam Monson here. Steve Palazzolo is out of commission right now, so we're going to go solo. We're not going to try and get him from the car, from the spotty internet, and God knows where, reacting to the news. We're going to do it solo and maybe mess with the chat, see what the interaction is like, and see what the comments are. But the big news today, according to Adam Schefter, is that Nick Bosa, 49ers defensive end, pass rusher Nick Bosa, has a confirmed torn ACL sustained during Sunday's win over Arizona. It's a clean tear, but Bosa will now need season-ending surgery and is done for the year. Obviously, this is a huge blow to the 49ers. They've had a strange season so far. On the one hand, they're 3-0. They've been winning tough games. They've been winning on the road. They're in a great position, but it's been incredibly costly in terms of an injury profile for them. They've had players dropping left, right, and center. But this is the first one who is down for the year, the first guy that's a significant piece that is down and staying down for the season, and is therefore not going to come back right to the rescue later on the season. And for this defense, I mean, that is an absolute body blow, a potentially back-breaking injury for the 49ers. Nick Bosa is one of the top defensive players in all of football. Maybe he's not a defensive player of the year yet, but I think he could be in any given season. Nick Bosa is one of the half dozen players in the NFL that in any given year could win defensive player of the year. He's a dominant player as a pass rusher, a dominant player as a run defender. And the only difference is, does he put it together for an entire season? But even this year, you look at the performance of that defense, their pass rush. Nick Bosa actually doesn't lead them in terms of total pressures. Bryce Huff has one more. He's got 11 pressures. Nick Bosa's got 10. But Bosa's the guy that gets all the attention on that defense. And he's got, multiple forced fumbles already this season. He is the primary source of pressure, the biggest focus for that defensive line. And I think he would have been, one of the best defensive players in the NFL again this season. Without him, they just don't necessarily have those horses. Bryce Huff's been a really important situational pass rusher for them. Rookie Michael Williams now needs to be a much bigger presence on that defensive line. But already this season, even with Nick Bosa in the lineup, this has been a middle of the pack defense in terms of pressure rate on the opposing quarterbacks. Tough to see that getting significantly better without him in the starting lineup. They were already going to be relying heavily on Bosa and rookies and young players on that defensive line. Now those guys are got to stand up and be the source of pass rush. And that's tough to see. Robert Salah, I think their defensive coordinator, former defensive coordinator for them as well, obviously got the job for the New York Jets as head coach. Didn't necessarily go that well for him there. He's back as the defensive coordinator. I think he's done a pretty good job for that team so far. They're getting a lot more pressure from different sources. It's not just Nick Bosa. They've been moving the ball around. They've been getting a ton of blitzes, much more than Salah typically likes to employ. They've been rushing with more than 4 guys. They've been doing a lot from a creative point of view, but now they're going to have to do even more. No Nick Bosa in the lineup. You're going to have to be, one of the most creative defenses in the league to try and get that kind of pressure. And you look at overall production so far of that defense. They are, 4th, according to NFL Pro's EPA per play on defense. Number 1 defense in the NFL in terms of EPA per play is the Minnesota Vikings and Flores. In large part because of what happened against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Jags are number 2. Their new defense or new scheme, new coach, new setup. The Green Bay Packers, number 3 with the addition of Michael Parsons. And then the San Francisco 49ers defense is number 4. So they've been doing wonders with Robert Salah. They've been doing an extremely good job. But now they've got to do it without one of the best defensive players in the NFL. And it's tough to see how that's going to work. So, let's see if we've got any questions from the chat, some kind of comments. We'll throw them up and see if we've got any kind of reaction. Otherwise, this will be a pretty short instant reaction. Obviously, this is a pretty catastrophic injury for him and for the 49ers. Josh B says he's torn his ACL in each leg now and one of them twice. Yeah, Nick Bosa, for as, well put together as he is, I mean, you look at him, the dude looks like a Marvel superhero. He's absolutely jacked to the gills, looks like a complete physical freak. Doesn't necessarily mean that, important things like ligaments, tendons, all those kinds of things are going to stay intact. And yeah, he has had some pretty serious injuries in his career. So definitely a blow. I mean, the good news from his perspective is he's come back healthy. He's come back looking as dominant as he ever has with each one of his injuries. So as much as the totality of the profile is not great, the fact that he's been able to come back and look like the same player every time, that's a huge thing. Iron Galactus. Michael Williams was not good at defensive end pass rush, more of an interior pass rush and outside defensive end run stuffer. Yeah, I mean, I do think that he's been an interesting profile as a player coming out and as a player in the NFL. He's never been the kind of dynamic, dominant pass rushing force. He is a big, long player who's got tools, who's got athletic ability, but is not, the finished article as a pass rusher. Certainly not the kind of guy that can pick up where Nick Bosa left off and be an absolute dominant force. And they kind of have now unfair needs on his shoulders. I mean, he needs to be potentially a more dominant player than it's reasonable to expect of him, given what he was coming out, given what he is right now. And that's not his fault. It's just the reality of the situation with, San Francisco losing their best pass rusher. The other obvious thing, I guess, is the trade deadline. Do they look to try and add a veteran player, trying to add somebody that's not on this roster to try and mitigate what they're asking from Michael Williams, from the rest of that pass rush? That, I think, is possible. A guy like Zadarius Smith would have been a perfect addition had the Eagles not swooped on him after that first game. There are other players available, nobody at that kind of caliber, but maybe they'll try and swing a trade. Maybe they'll try and add somebody. So, yeah, that's tough. Frederick Weaver points out Nick Bosa was, in fact, Defensive Player of the Year in 2022. So that's what happens when you're trying to react solo and there's nobody there to correct you on the other side of it. Jalen Phillips, Kenny mentions as a possible option. That would make a lot of sense. Jalen Phillips, I think, has got a ton of talent, has dealt with his own injury profile. And obviously things in Miami are not going particularly well. So I don't think they're going to be looking to move anybody right now. But in a couple of weeks, if things continue going south for Miami, that's exactly the type of team that could be, undergoing a fire sale and shipping off anybody with any kind of value and hitting the reset button firmly and absolutely looking to ship people. So, yeah, Jalen Phillips, I think, would be an interesting, like if I'm the 49ers, if I'm John Lynch and I'm picking up the phone, Jalen Phillips would absolutely be somebody I was targeting. Somebody else there mentioned Trey Hendrickson as well, given the way things are, well, basically given the Joe Burrow injury. Again, absolutely pick up the phone and see what's possible. I think the Bengals are probably less inclined to make that happen, largely just because, look, they're still in reasonable position, even with the way that game went this weekend. Teams with a winning record, I think, are loath to accept that they're not real contenders this year. So while from the outside, I think the rest of us would be looking at the Bengals and saying, hey, with Jake Browning at quarterback, they're probably not going anywhere. And if you're going to cash in at all on Trey Hendrickson, now's the time to do it. Inside the building, internally, I doubt they're going to be thinking that way. So, yeah, look, John Lynch should pick up the phone and see if it's even on the table. But I imagine they would say no, pretty much. What else have we got? Timothy Walthall says flip a fourth or a fifth to Atlanta for Leonard Floyd. I mean, obviously you've got some familiarity there. I doubt they're particularly inclined to move him, given that they've only recently acquired him. I think Bryce Huff is going to have to step into a bigger role. Bryce Huff and Michael Williams are going to have to carry this thing. Bryce Huff has already shown that, look, whatever reason in Philadelphia, it was just a bad connection. He shouldn't have been as bad as he was. I mean, they paid him big money coming off his time with the Jets, where he was arguably the best situational pass rusher in the NFL. They brought him in with a ton of money and said, look, we want you to be more than that. We want you to be a bigger role than this defense. It didn't work. And even when they scaled him back to being just a situational rusher again, it didn't work, to the point where he ended up being a healthy scratch in the Super Bowl and was being supplanted by guys like Jalen Hunt. But he's shown this year, like, that player didn't disappear. He's still a talented pass rusher, and maybe he is limited to being a sort of more situational style of pass rusher. We've had those guys in the NFL over the last, 10, 15 years, but you can put him on the field for the other snaps. Even if you say, hey, look, I'm not that interested in you defending the run. Just affect the quarterback at all times. You might need to scale up his snaps. You might need to scale up his workload without necessarily putting more things on his plate. Just say, look, you're going to be playing more, but I still want you getting after the quarterback and disrupting it as much as humanly possible. As this guy says, JP Page 2, the 49ers have $20 million in cap space. There is room to pay a player if they want to. Absolutely true. This is definitely a situation where they may be looking to the trade market or, to deploy some of the resources. They're not in the kind of bind where they're just screwed. They can actually try and make some moves and try and make something happen. Brock Purdy's contract is paid out or is a real thing now. They have to be a little bit more careful and more frugal than they had to in years past. But yeah, I think they could make a short-term move and try and bring somebody in to deal with this, because the bottom line, I think, is that they have to be looking at this and saying, I don't know if this team can win a Super Bowl without Nick Bosa and the current options to replace him with rookies, with Bryce Huff. If they don't add somebody, I think they have to be thinking this might put a cap on whether this team can win. Even with, 3-0, they're in great position within the division. Even if they can extend that, can they go into Philadelphia in the playoffs and win that without somebody like Nick Bosa, unless they make additional moves to fix it? I think they need to have that real conversation. If they think that will stop them, then you might want to spend some money that you wouldn't otherwise have earmarked for this season that would have been deployed for future years. So I think it's a very real conversation. If not, losing Nick Bosa, there's no team in the NFL really that is well equipped to lose one of the top 5 defensive players in the NFL. He's an absolute force. He would have been the reason that this defense, along with Robert Salah and, support from some of the other guys, is enough that the offense, if it gets all its players healthy again, could fire this team into still being a real contender. Without Nick Bosa, Robert Salah is going to have to go deep into his bag. Michael Williams is going to have to take a step forward. And I think in particular, Bryce Huff is going to have to really be a bigger force for that defense than he's been. Otherwise, inevitably, they're just going to be a significantly worse team. And that, unfortunately, is the situation they're dealing with. They've had a great start to the year, but losing Nick Bosa absolutely has the chance to be a body blow and a backbreaker for this defense that otherwise has been pretty impressive so far this season. So, look, that's going to do it for the instant reaction. Not much to say other than devastating blow for the 49ers and the first injury they've had that's a real sort of season-long cost for them. They're going to get players back on offense. They're going to get the rest of those injured players back at some point, but Nick Bosa confirmed to be down for the year with a torn ACL. Devastating blow for him, body blow for the 49ers defense, and potentially for the team's fortunes overall this season. So thank you for watching. Thanks for the interaction in the chat, and we will be back on Check the Mic for real in a non-instant reaction way. Take it easy.